So, what's the date today?
Today is June 27, 2011.
Actually, 26. Tomorrow's the 27th.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm a day ahead. of
So, happy
schedule.
birthday a day early.
Thank you.
And we're here with a bunch of your friends, our friends, to celebrate 80 years. 80 years of God's goodness in your life. And all my life, I've heard all these amazing stories of what God has done. And they're not recorded anywhere.
Okay.
So we're going to fix that today.
Good.
So just to get your memory going, just to help you loosen up a little bit here, see if maybe you can think of some early childhood memories, a funny story. I seem to remember something about a pheasant.
That was later on.
Oh, okay.
That comes later.
Okay. So,
Okay. I was a daddy's girl. And I can remember when my father used to come home from work, and I was just a little tyke, and he would let me stand on the toes of his shoes, and he'd dance me all around the kitchen on that linoleum floor, and his shoes would slide along, and I thought I was doing the dancing, but it was really my dad. But I would just be so excited. I was dancing with my daddy. So I remembered that.
mhm. So Daddy God has kind of been continuing that through your life, huh? Letting you think you're doing stuff?
Right. And it's really him doing it, guiding me. That's like the footsteps of a righteous person are ordered of the Lord.
Yeah. So where have your footsteps taken you? When did you first move out of the house? Or your first job?
My first job was in Denver, Colorado. I was born and raised in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan. And my first job was in Denver, Colorado. In my senior year at high school, we had to write a story or something as to what we wanted to do. And I wanted to work in a hospital. So I was hired to work at Bethesda Sanitarium with the TB cases. And that was from the church that I used to go to, the Christian Reformed Church. So there I was, hired to work in Denver, Colorado. And my supervisor was a friend of my uncle who was a missionary in New Mexico. So it just kind of all connected. And the dean of women that was at that house had been my mother's school teacher and also my brother's school teacher. So she kind of took charge of me and told me what I could do and what I couldn't do, and just kind of bossed me around a little bit. So it was like the supervisor of nurses was a friend of the family, and the dean was a friend of the family. And so I just kind of fit in there. It was really nice. I worked there for over a year, and then they switched over, and I went back to Michigan. So
And then what? How
Yeah.
old were you?
I was probably 19. Oh, but during that time, when I was out in Denver, I received a message that my brother had been in an accident, and I had to fly home. My brother was almost 3 years older than I was, so he actually was killed in an accident. He was killed by a drunk driver. So I had kind of a rough time. I didn't like drunk drivers.
And what happened with all that in your life? Or does that come later?
That comes later.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what else happened.
Your dad?
2 years later, after my brother was killed, and my dad just totally closed down, wouldn't talk about it. So within 2 years, he died. He died of cancer, and the doctor said it was from the trauma of my brother's death. So our whole family was kind of upset with this whole thing. Everything was different. So
More friends arriving.
yes.
So, do you want to share about what they told your mom and dad after your brother was killed? What had happened in his life?
My mother had always prayed for us kids, and she prayed my brother all through Germany. He had been rebellious and went into the army. He had to have special permission because of his age. So he was in the army and the occupation troops in Germany. And my mother prayed constantly for his safety, that God would bring him home safely and that he would accept the Lord as his Savior. And after he was killed, then his girlfriend's father came to my parents and said that, I just want you to know that your son accepted the Lord as his Savior in our church. So that was an answer to prayer, mother's prayers.
Mm-hmm. I think the pheasant story actually came before that,
Well,
though,
the
didn't it?
pheasant story came when I was 13 years old. I had long hair, and I had just washed my hair and fixed it the way I wanted to, and then I went with my folks. We were going to go away, but my brother had raised pheasants, and they had one hen pheasant left, and my dad was going to release it in the woods. So here he stood holding this pheasant, and I was standing in front of him. And as he released that pheasant left a dropping in my hair. I was so embarrassed. I made my father drive me back home so I could rewash my hair, and I did not go out with him that day. That was so embarrassing. Never forget that. And my dad just laughed about it. He thought that was funny. You would too.
I do, yeah.
No sympathy. Okay.
So
I
the
was
pheasant
13.
happened, and your brother accepted the Lord, and he died, and then your dad died, and what happened next?
Well, I got married, and that was before my father died.
Okay.
So I got married. That was in 51, October of 51. And,
Oh, look.
oh, it's my wedding picture. Haven't seen that in years.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Right. Anyhow, my husband went into service. He had come home on a 3-day pass and said, let's get married. So just like that, we got married and traveled all over for several years.
And you prayed for kids, I hear.
Oh, I did. I wanted a baby so badly. I just kept praying and praying, and the doctors kept telling me, you'll never get pregnant. You're just not capable of getting pregnant. And they gave me all kinds of excuses that things hadn't grown properly, so I was not ever going to have a baby. And we were in Germany at the time, and I became very, very sick. Well, my dad had died of stomach cancer, so I knew that that's what was wrong with me. I was so sick. Everything that went down came right back up. And I just slept all the time, and the doctor said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just homesick. I said, homesick for what? And they examined me, and they said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. It's all in your head. 5.5 months later, this little German doctor said, you're pregnant. I was 5.5 months pregnant before they knew it. But meanwhile, everything going down came right back up, and they said I was lying to them, that if I was really that sick, I would have lost more weight. And I'd only lost about 3.5 pounds in that 5.5 months, you know. So anyhow, they hospitalized me and fed me through my veins for 3 days, and I was sick. I was so sick. Anyway, I had a healthy baby boy, and very quiet. They couldn't wake him up. he just kept sleeping, but they had given me the strongest medication they could for seasickness and everything. So, of course, it was real hard to wake Tony up. But everything went well. Healthy baby, very quiet, hardly knew he was around. And then
2 years later.
I got pregnant, and I knew immediately that I was pregnant. I mean, just within days, I knew I was pregnant. And that went well. That went really well. And and then this one day, I was walking all around the base. We were up in Michigan. And I was walking all around the base, pushing the stroller with Tony in it, and just kept walking and walking and walking. And my husband came home and he says, I think we ought to take you to the base hospital, have you checked. So the hospital was just short ways away. We lived right there on the base. And they examined me and they said, you're not going anywhere. You're going to have that baby right now. And it was just like that. I mean, the doctor said, if you hurry up, he says, I can make dinner tonight. I was only there a little while, and they took me to the delivery room, and I wanted to watch. I made the medics a little bit upset. I said, turn the mirrors, let me see what's happening. So I watched the full delivery, and the doctor kept telling me, if it's a girl, I want her. Well, I had my little girl, healthy and well, long dark hair. You don't have that picture on there, but
No.
she had long dark hair, looked like a little Hummel figurine. So anyhow, Joanne and Tony were very much different, where Tony was very quiet. Joanne was a bit different. And by the way, she was born for wheels. And I had this little German buggy, and I put her baby seat in there, and I'd strap her in. I had to strap her into everything. I had a harness on her all the time.
You know, these are supposed to be stories about your life.
That is my life. That is my life. So anyway, it was just, my house was filled with laughter, a lot of racket, vaulted ceilings, and she would just squeal and kick that buggy. Everything would rock. And I had quite a time. I had the two kids, a very quiet little boy and a little dog, and then Joanne, born for wheels. If it wasn't a buggy, it was a stroller, or it was a scooter, or it was a trike, or a bicycle. And now it's a car. So anyway, I had the two kids, and we still traveled. We went.
Now, didn't the doctor give you a rough time about your kids when you were coming back
Oh,
to the
yeah.
States?
That was when you were 6 years old, I think. He looked at my records and he said, where did you adopt these children? I said, they're not adopted. They're my natural born kids. He says, no. All the records show you can't have kids. I said, that's not what God said. So I have two children. Okay, what's
So,
next?
What's next on the list? You had some health issues come up. Didn't the doctor say something about arthritis?
Oh, that was early on. We were at the air base, and I was aching all over. And the doctors examined me, and they said, you're full of arthritis. By the time you're 35 years old, you will be in a wheelchair. Go home and take aspirin. Can't do anything for you. So I didn't believe that. I didn't believe that at all, and I just kept on with everything. And then when Tony was born, that was back in '60, I had what they said was bursitis in my shoulder. And in order for me to hang diapers on the line, I had to push my arm up like that, tears running down my face because my shoulders were so sore, especially the right one. And they said it was bursitis, and anyhow, God healed me of that with some vitamin B1. So then what came next? I'm trying to remember.
Didn't you have some allergic reaction to something?
Right. I'm trying to remember what that was for. Oh, I had, back in '79, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was hospitalized. Of course, again, cancer to me means death, and I was told I had cancer, and I had to have both breasts removed, and had to have blood transfusions and everything. And then after that, they gave me some sulfa drug, and I also had some heavy doses of penicillin. I broke out in hives. I had hives all over, in my throat, all over. I was a wreck. So yeah, I remember that.
I thought there was another incident before that.
Trying to remember what that
Middle
was.
of the night.
You woke somebody up.
The medic came in and sat next to you.
Oh, yeah. I had been in a car accident, and I was hospitalized, and they asked me if I was allergic to anything. I said, yeah, sulfa drug, and I can't take codeine because I said it makes me very depressed. So this one night, it was lights out, and I laid down to go to sleep, and the whole ward was trying to sleep, and all of a sudden, I scooted toward the end of the bed. I held on to that bottom rail of the bed, and I sat there and I went, ow! Ow! And the medic came in, sat on the bed, put his arm around my waist. He said, Dottie, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, I don't know. And then I was hanging on so tightly, and I said, did they give me codeine? He says, I'll check. And I sat there. And he came back, he said, they gave you soma compound, that has codeine in it. And then I was mad, and I howled all the louder.
And what did they give you when you were discharged?
They gave me a prescription for the same thing. But I didn't get it filled. I was so mad I never went back to that doctor.
So then, you were diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor had you meet somebody
Okay, help me out.
in the hospital, the lady and the husband?
Oh, that's right. I was in the hospital, and they did the biopsy, probably on a Monday. And then Tuesday, he says, I have bad news for you. He says, you have malignancy. You have cancer. Both breasts. They will have to be cut off. And I could feel a tear come out of the corner of my eye. And he said, no, no. And he said, come with me, little fella. And he just ran ahead of me into another room. And this was already staged. It was sort of a shock treatment thing. And he went around the bed, and here's this lady. And she had had a breast removed, and I could see the stitches. And my eyes went to that for just a brief second. And then my eyes turned to her eyes. And it was just like, she and her husband was around the bed too. They were both looking at me, and the doctor was looking at me. But her eyes were saying to me, Dottie, I'm alive. And to me, cancer was death. And it was just like, I work with alcohol drug addicts, and that's my past also. And I went through the first 3 steps of AA where my life is unmanageable. Everything's upside down. But I know God. He's my higher power. And he can restore me to health and strength, and he can restore everything. And I was also going through a divorce at that time. So everything, my whole life was in an upheaval. But you know, God can change all of that. And step 3, I'm going to let him. He can do it. I'm going to let him. And then it was just as though there was well, I had billows of peace come over me. And then it was like a shock of lightning going through me that God's got something planned for me. I don't know what it is, but let him do it. And I said to the people, I asked the doctor, I says, well, when do you want to do the surgery? And that was on a Tuesday. He said, we'll do it first thing Thursday morning. I said, okay, thank you. I'm tired. I'm going back to bed. And I thanked the lady, and I walked across the hall, crawled in bed, and went to sleep. So I went through the surgery and went through support groups. It's so important to have support groups. And that's what I did. I got some very strong support groups.
Well, but you kind of started your own physical therapy early, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. My hair is totally straight, and I like curly hair. So ever since I was 13, I've had the habit of pinning my hair up. You know, you part it and make rolls and pin it up in pin curls. So after they pulled the blood transfusions out of my arms, I sat on the edge of the bed, and I said to the nurse, can somebody help me wash my hair, please? She looked at me like I was crazy. She shook her head and walked out. So I said, okay, I'll go do it myself. So I went into the bathroom at the hospital, held my head under the faucet, went and washed my hair, came back into the room, and I thought, man, I'm tired. Whew, I feel weak. But I sat there and I started pinning my hair up, not realizing that's an impossibility. You can't do that because all the muscles are cut and everything. And here I am pinning my hair up, and the nurse walks in, walks back out, another nurse walks in. They were all shocked, and I said, I'm awful tired. But I had to do that. I pinned my hair up, and that's what I've done. And I do believe, after they send in other people to help me, you know, that Reach to Recovery, where they teach you to move your arms up, where you have to walk up the walls like that in order to get your arms up. I was already doing that.
Self-starter that you are.
I you know, that's strange.
Mm-hmm.
I shocked them all, I guess.
Yeah.
And I didn't know any better. I guess if you don't know that you can't do it, you know, do it. Try it.
So you had the surgery, you had 9 months of chemo, and then what?
That was bad. Chemotherapy was so bad. I had to work, and, well, like I said, I was going through a divorce, and I had 2 teenagers at home, and I had to work full time, and I was pretty sick. So we went through that, and I finally went to the doctor, and I said, look, I'm here, but I'm not going to have another treatment. He said, well, how many have you had? I said, well, I've had 9 months. Well, that's long enough. So they quit doing it. So I quit having the chemo, and I was doing really good for a period of time until I started having pain in my liver. And they sent me to the doctor, and they did a liver scan. And they discovered a couple spots on my liver, and they didn't know what it was, so they sent me in for some testing, and, you know, tomography, where I was laying in this big thing at the hospital, and they were going to, you know, take pictures of slices of the liver and that, and the doctor said, we're going to do a needle biopsy, but he said, I'm a little concerned, because he said, if I'm a hair off, I could puncture your lung, and it would, we'd have to put you in the hospital. But if that's a blood tumor that we see, you could bleed profusely, and we would also have to hospitalize you. Well, I got these 2 kids at home, and I got a job to go back to, and I got all this other stuff. So I prayed. I said, you know, God, why are we doing this? I said, you know what's wrong with me. I said, if you don't want this to go through, please stop it. And I just laid there, and the doctor came on. He said, Dottie, relax. We're not going to do the needle biopsy, but I do want to get the rest of the pictures. So that's how that went. I did not have a needle biopsy. And I went home, and everything went on as usual, and I felt pretty good. And then I think that was in 1981, and then it got pretty bad. I started having sharp pains in my liver, and I became extremely depressed, where it was like I just couldn't go on. And I went in for another liver scan. And before I got the report, I woke up one morning and I laid there and I hurt so badly. And I said, God, you gave me a job to do. You want me there? You get me out of bed. I'm not budging. And I put my head deep in the pillow. And within seconds, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my feet flat on the floor. And, you know, that was so strange to me. I sat there and I just kind of giggled. I thought, oh, this is silly. Here I am depressed and in pain, and I'm sitting here with my feet on the floor. So I went into the bathroom, and I stood there. And, of course, the counter on my vanity was bright orange, and that orange glow was going against my face, and I looked miserable. And it was just like, God. And I looked into the mirror, and I can remember looking straight ahead, and I says, God, I can't live like this. You got to do something. And while I'm looking straight ahead, I saw a little rainbow about heart high, little bitty rainbow, brilliant, like neon lights. And inside was printed, I have healed you. I thought, oh. Shut my eyes, and I thought I'm hallucinating, but that rainbow was still there, brilliant as ever. I have healed you. So I stepped into the tub, pulled the shower curtain around me, and with my eyes closed, I was showering, and I saw that rainbow. And of course, within myself, I'm reading, I have healed you. And every time I did that, I have healed you. It moved, and it moved. Each time, I have healed you, I have healed you. It went into, that rainbow went into my mouth and exploded. My whole body shook. From head to foot, I just shook. I shook from terribly. And when I stepped out of that tub, feet on the floor, I knew I was healed. I didn't know what I was healed of, but I knew I was healed. And as I was walking out of the bathroom, it was like I looked up, and I could see something coming towards me. It was like this. And I watched it, and it came, and it went right into my forehead, and it stamped on my brain. It doesn't matter what it looks like. I have healed you. I said, okay. So I went and got ready for work, and I got Joanne out of her room, and she would drive me to work. And I told her what happened, and she just listened. This was strange to her, too. So she dropped me off at work, and she went on to work. And I got there, and the phone rang. And this doctor said, Dottie, this is Dr. So-and-so. I'm very concerned about you. He says, you know, back in 81, you had 2 spots on your liver. Now your liver is covered with many suspicious-looking spots. I said, okay, what do you want me to do? No fear. I'm healed. Anyway, he said, all your records, I've sent them to your oncologist. You need to go back and see him. I said, okay, thank you. And I no sooner hung up when our chief counselor walks in, and that was Doug Nelson, an Assembly of God pastor. And he sat down and he said, well, Dottie, what's going on in your life today? I said, well, let me tell you. And I told him, he said, well, may we pray with you? And I said, sure. So they made me sit down, and the 4 counselors stood around me. They read out of James 5, if any be sick among you, call upon the elders of the church, and prayer of faith will heal the sick. So they anointed me with oil. Now these 4 counselors laid hands on me, prayed over me in tongues, and it was like, I'm already healed. I'm the healed of the Lord. I'm healed. I know I'm healed. So anyhow, I had prayer warriors all around me. So I called and I made an appointment to go to the oncologist. And I think it was started probably on a Monday. And then Wednesday I went to my oncologist. And he was recording that they were going to have, he was going to do a needle biopsy and the whole bit. And I says, what's your problem? He says, what's the problem? Look at all these spots. And he motioned for me to look. But all I could see, another vision, I saw a hand reach up and take that little round thing that's on a shade, you know, that little crocheted thing. And that hand reached up, took that little pole thing, and pulled a white shade in front of my eyes. I never saw what the doctor wanted me to see, which was probably all my x-rays on the screen, all the spots and everything he wanted. I didn't see them. And it was like all I could hear was, it doesn't matter what it looks like. I have healed you. I walked out of his office, and I went and picked Joanne up from her work. She gets behind the wheel of the car, and I said, Joe, we serve a God of healing. And she says, I agree. And I said, no more chemo, no more tests. I'm the healed of the Lord. And she says, Mom, I agree. That was before we really realized the prayer of agreement and the power of that prayer of agreement. So that's where that's at. I never went back to, I did go to the one doctor that ordered the test, and this was some years later. And I said, I don't want you to touch me. I just want you to hear me. And he was holding my file, and I told him just what I've told you now. And he says, Dottie, doctors don't know everything. He says, thank you so much for coming in and telling me this, because every time I drive by Calvary, I think, what happened to Dottie? Because the prognosis was that the breast cancer cells had metastasized to the liver, and I was on my way out. But God healed me.
Thank you.
What year was
Okay. That was, I think, in 1984. And I'm cancer-free.
Praise the Lord.
I am the healed of the Lord.
So doctors don't know everything.
Correct.
They said you couldn't have kids, you had two. They said you'd be in a wheelchair by the time you're 35. You'll be 80 tomorrow. They had lots of bad prognoses for you, but
Right.
God
So-
said no.
And that's it. We have to believe the report of the Lord.
Yeah.
So, you know, whenever things happen, it's like, no matter how bad it gets, God knows.
Mhm.
And it's in his hands.
Now, before we finish, I have to jump back to the middle because you kind of alluded to it. And Calvary has been such a big part of your life. You've been there almost 40 years.
It'll be, let's see, 39 years
Okay.
on Tuesday.
So will you tell your story?
My husband said that I had to get a job, and I was petrified because I hadn't worked outside of the home for years. And he says, we can't make it, you gotta get a job. So I opened the bulletin at church, and it says secretary wanted at Calvary Rehab. And I thought, Calvary Rehab, that's gotta be for stroke cases and, you know, such. And I've worked in hospitals, you know, and I was a certified practical nurse, and I could do that. So I went and applied at Calvary, and it was for alcoholics. And I thought, oh, that's strange. But anyhow, the man that interviewed me was a chaplain from the denomination that I was going to church, and he and I were from the same city in Michigan, and we hit it off really well. And I said, well, I type very slowly, and I don't take shorthand. He said, that's okay. So about a day or so later, he hired me. He says, we just hired a secretary. Thought I'd let you know. I said, oh, that's nice. And I was so relieved. He said, it's you. So he says, when can you come to work? Well, the next day was my birthday, the 27th of June. So I said, well, I could come on Tuesday then, or on the next day, the 28th. So I started on the 28th of June, 39 years ago. And it was through my work at Calvary, hired as a secretary, that Barney, the old man that founded Calvary, spotted me as an alcoholic and pill addict, and he caught on to that right away. So I went through all the lectures at St. Luke's Hospital and took the little test that if you answer yes to 3 of these questions, you may have a drinking problem. Well, I was so paranoid that when I came back to work, I slid that under the work that I was typing from, and I'd look around. If nobody was watching, I'd look at the paper and I'd answer. I answered yes to all but one question, and I knew I had a drinking problem. So I looked up, and it was just like all the blood drained out of my face. I was in shock, and I said, God, I have a problem. Please help me. That night, I went home, and I gathered up all my pills. I had, being military, I could get any pills I wanted. So I had big bottles of Valium, Librium, Ativan. I had even had some phenobarb in there and some other stuff. I took all those bottles, dumped everything down the toilet, threw out the bottles, and I never had a drink of alcohol since. God delivered me. He just totally delivered me, just like he did of nicotine years before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was another one. When we were in Germany, and Joanne was 3 years old, my son was 5, and I was a chain smoker. My hands were yellow-brown from nicotine, everything. I mean, I had cigarettes all over the place. They were only a quarter a pack, and I smoked like a fiend. And I was in the kitchen this one night, and my babysitter, a beautiful little blonde girl, 15 years old, spoke beautiful Oxford English, and my kids loved her. And she sat by my kitchen table and lit up a cigarette, and I turned around and I looked at her and I said, Helga, you can't smoke. She took a drag of the cigarette and blew it at me, and the look in her eye was total disdain. She says, Mrs. DeLute, you smoke. I was so convicted. It was like everything within me, it just was so strange, and I could feel something within me that just came up and said, you'll never see me smoke again. And it was like, who said that, And that was it. I never smoked again. But that was total, deliverance by God. He convicted me. The Holy Spirit just took hold, and I never smoked again. And then, like I said, no alcohol or pills since for 39 years. So God is a miracle-working God.
He's a good God.
He's a very good God.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're going to take a break because we've had some more people come that you haven't had a chance to say hello to. And I know there's a few more stories left, so we'll do that later.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we had a nice break, and you got to talk to a bunch of your friends. But we left out a segment of your life that had some interesting stories in it.
Okay.
So, my dad, your first husband, died. I got married. And what happened with you?
Well, I was living alone over on the west side, northwest side, and had this big, beautiful house. And I took in people that didn't have any place to stay, and I thought that was my ministry. And
Women alone.
Yeah, women alone. I had one woman that had 3 or 4 kids. She stayed with me for a while, and I just took in people that needed help. And then there was a gentleman from my church, a very, very godly man, an elder. He was the calling elder of our church, would go to the hospitals and visit everybody. And Joanne really liked this man real well. She says, Mom, this is a nice man. And this man would always come over and talk to me, and I thought, I really respected him, a nice man. And he wanted to date me. And I didn't think I was ready for that. So every now and then, I would say, well, I'd go to dinner with him, but I would drive my car and meet him somewhere so that I would have the freedom to leave when I was uncomfortable.
Good move, Dottie.
That went on for a couple of years where we sort of dated like that. And then I felt a little more at ease where he would come and get me, or I'd go over to his house in Tempe and he'd have dinner ready for me. And it just, you know, Joanne would say, "Is it love yet?" I said, "Oh, knock it off, no." So anyhow, he proposed to me, and I said, I couldn't marry unless I was totally out of debt. And in order to be out of debt, I would have to sell my house because my house had big payments and big utility payments and this, that, and the next thing. And I said, yeah, I'd have to sell the house. So I left it at that until one day he said, "You know, you could put the house on the market." So I called the real estate lady. And she came over and she said, "Oh, this is a beautiful house. And we'll price it just right." She says, "It will sell, but you know, the market is so bad." And she said, "You know, all the houses around here, they've been on the market for a couple of years. So it would take at least 9 months to 12 months for the house to even sell." I said, "I'm not in a hurry." So we went on with that until
You had a dream.
I had a
There
dream.
was a guy that you knew.
I had a dream that the real estate man that had sold me the house and was mad that I didn't list with him, he said he'd never show the house because he was so mad at me. I said, "That's okay. Not in a hurry." And then one night I had a dream that he came to my house and he was waving a piece of paper and it was a check, and he said, "I just sold your house. I just sold your house." And I thought, how strange. And I even saw the couple. There was this young couple with him, and they were the ones that were buying the house, but I couldn't see their face, but I knew that I knew them. So I tried to call the real estate lady and tell her about my dream, but she was out of state. So a few days later, here comes this fella, Tom, and he says, "Dottie, I need to show your house again because I have a couple that's interested." I said, "Okay." And I knew it was sold. So he came and he brought this couple through, and he was our maintenance man where I worked. I knew him and his wife. And it was just like everything inside of me just said, the house is sold. So he came to me and he says, "Dottie, I just sold your house." And I said, "Yeah, I know it." So he said, "How soon can you get out?"
Shotgun wedding?
Yeah. So I thought, now what do I do? And of course I've been praying, and I said to God, if you want me to marry JD, the house has to sell. The house sold. I said, and I have to get rid of all this furniture. And it was just like one thing after another. And I said, now God, I don't think I love this man the way a wife should love a husband. I said, you want me to marry him? You got to take care of that. And I did. I fell in love with JD. And it was just, the wedding went off so quickly. Joanne baked my wedding cake, beautiful carrot cake, everything. I mean, I was just standing there watching it all happen. It just it was like dominoes just falling into place. And
Now, you left out a little tidbit.
So I have a question, Dottie. Who gave you away at your wedding?
I asked Joanne, I said, my son won't give me away. I said, do you think Walt would give me away? And Joanne says, what son-in-law wouldn't love to give his mother-in-law away?
I gave my mother-in-law away and she keeps coming back.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, there was a lot of humor. Anyhow, my wedding night to JD, I, I felt absolutely comfortable, beautiful, at ease, and it was just like I had bought this dress to wear to Joanne's wedding, and she wouldn't let me wear it. So here I had this dress in my closet, and my roommate at that time, this Anna, she said, "Oh, that's your wedding dress." I said, "You got to be kidding! I'm not getting married." So I hung it in the closet, and that's the dress that I wore at our wedding.
And so how long were you married?
3 years and 3 months, and
And how was that?
he was so good to me. He was a very godly man, very kind. He was just a wonderful man. Everybody loved him,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody felt safe with him. And he called me his big wife because his first wife, he had been married to her for 42 years, the love of his life, and she was a little tiny bitty thing. So I was his big wife. And her name was Doris. And so every now and then he'd slip up and call me Doris, and he would be, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I said, "Don't be sorry." I said, "I mean, you were married to her for 42 years. Love of his life." And he'd tell me all these stories. But he also loved dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were going to gather, we'd spend time with just the two of us. When I married him, the dog resented me. It was a little Boston Terrier, and JD and I would sit on the couch together, and the dog would jump up and shove me away from him and growl at me. JD would laugh, and he'd go in his chair and take the dog on his lap, and that was the end of that. So I thought, well, we can't do anything as long as the dog's alive. So he kept saying, "Well, we'll do this, we'll go here, we'll do this, we'll go to Jerusalem, we'll do all of this after Goliath dies."
And
Well, Goliath died.
you didn't do it.
I didn't do it.
Okay. Just wanted that on the record.
You prayed that he would die?
I did not do that, no. Anyway, after Goliath died, JD was so, it just broke his heart, and he died too. But that was another thing. I think Goliath must have died on Monday, and he called me at, JD called me at work, and he says, "Dottie, Goliath died." And the dog had been trying so hard to die for days and days. And he'd carry it through the house, and he'd talk to it, and he'd hold it, and he'd take it outside, and just, I mean, his whole life was wrapped up in this dog. And it was like I was non-existent. And so anyhow, he called me that the dog had died, and I said, "Do you want me to come home?" He says, "No, I'll be all right." So Monday, he had a little casket made, and he put a folded up mattress pad in there and Goliath's toys, and he put Goliath in there all washed up, and he was going to let Goliath lay there by the fireplace for the night. And then finally he says, we went out for dinner, and then we came back. He says, "Would you help me bury Goliath?" And I said, "Yeah." So we went outside, and he put he dug this place to bury Goliath, and then he covered it up, and he put 2 chairs there, and he said, "Sit down." Okay. For 2 hours, he talked to me about Goliath and the whole life, the mother dog, the sister dog, Goliath and his wife, and all of this. For 2 hours, I sat and listened about Goliath. So that would have been, that was Monday. Tuesday, he went through the house and gathered up everything that belonged to Goliath, bagged it up. Wednesday, that day is totally out of my mind. I don't know where it went, what happened. But Thursday morning, JD walked me out to my car, and he said, "I sure miss cleaning up after my little buddy." And I said, yeah, I know. I went to work. 5 o'clock, I called JD, and I said, you sound kind of strange. He says, I don't feel very well. I said, well, I'm coming right home. And I just flew out of the center, got into my car. It took me 35 minutes to get home. I got up to the door, unlocked it, and I ran in. And JD was laying on my side of the bed, on his side, blue from here up, totally dead. I mean, he was stone cold dead. And I stood there in shock for just a minute, and I tested him, and he was dead. So all of a sudden, that same feeling I had when I quit smoking, I had that feeling come up out of my stomach, and it just came up, and it said, you'll see the dead raised. So I picked up the phone. I said, 911. I said, please help me. I think my husband's dead. I knew he was dead. So they put somebody on the phone to lead me through CPR. And now my husband was a little man. Yeah, and I think I could have easily picked him up and carried him through the house. I mean, he was small, light. But you talk about being dead weight.
Yes.
They told me to take the pillow away from his head. I could hardly lift him to move that pillow. Put him flat, and they were leading me through the CPR, and as I'm doing the compressions, it's like an attack of Satan. You're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong. And I kept saying, oh God, you're doing it wrong. Well, my fourth set of compressions, the paramedics and the police came running in the house and kind of shoved me up against the wall. They grabbed JD and threw him on the floor. And then the police took me out of that room, took me into the kitchen, and I made some phone calls. I talked to Walt.
You talked to Walt. It was one of the rare times when I was cooking.
That way you don't cook anymore?
Might be traumatized, yeah.
So anyway, I told Walt what was going on, that we were going to go to Tempe St. Luke's Hospital. And then I called JD's son and told him, and the burner on the stove was on, so I quick turned that off. I remember that. And anyway, I had walked in the house. I talked to JD at 5 o'clock, came into the house at 5:35. 6 o'clock, we were in the emergency room, and JD was blue from the waist up. The medics were working over him, and by then JD Jr. was there, and Walt and Joanne were there, and Walt and Joanne prayed over me. And I was at peace. I'm going to see the dead raised.
Well, let me interject here. So I was at home cooking when she called. Walt was there, talked to her on the phone, and when he hung up with her, he and I prayed, and we prayed for three things: that God's perfect will would be done, that God would be glorified, and that JD would be totally healed. And so I quit cooking, and we went to meet her at the hospital.
So then the doctor took us into the room, and he said, your husband is not breathing. The machine is breathing for him. We can give you no hope. And I'm just sitting there very calmly. I don't need their hope. My hope comes from the Lord.
Amen.
I'm going to see the dead raised. And they put him in the intensive care unit. And his son and I stayed the whole night standing by his bed, talking to each other, sharing miracles, and just knowing. And the nurse kept coming in. We had a male nurse. And he kept saying, I don't want you to get your hopes up. Otherwise, you're going to be very angry at God when your husband, when
If he dies.
if he dies. And we said, it's okay. He's going to live. So anyway, we went through that night. That was Thursday night. And I went back to work the next morning to tell the people at work what was going on. Then I went back to the hospital. JD Jr. took a break and came back. And we just spent our time there at the hospital. And Joanne brought in some tapes. And we asked if we could have those tapes running all the time, scripture tapes. And they just kind of discouraged us, didn't want us to do that, but we did it. And we just kept talking to JD and, praying over him and everything. And this one urologist came in, and he said they had sent him in because they would have to do dialysis because his kidneys weren't functioning. So Joanne and I got up, laid hands on JD, prayed over him, and then this urologist came in and he said, "Has your husband ever had a kidney problem?" "Not that I know of." He says, "Well, he doesn't have one now either," and he walked out. Then the little stomach doctor, a little lady, came in with this big sheet of x-rays and showed me the intestinal tract and everything. She said, his bowels haven't moved and we're going to have to do surgery. And Joanne looks at me. We got up, laid hands on him, and within seconds his bowels had moved. So she was gone. So we got rid of the urologist, we got rid of the stomach specialist, and then Saturday morning, Joanne and Walt came in with a pastor. And a little nurse, a little Baptist nurse, kept tinkering around with stuff in there, and J.D. Jr. was there. And this pastor said, looked things over, and he said, "How do you want me to pray?" Well, I said, "Well, for total healing. I want him healed." And he kind of looked things over, and so we all laid hands on J.D. and prayed over him Saturday morning.
Well, he was in a coma at that time, too.
So anyway, then we just stood around talking for a while, and then Joanne, Walt, and the pastor left. 10 minutes after they were gone, J.D. opened his eyes. He looked at me, but he immediately turned to his son and pulled himself up on his son to look out past the nurse's station. Had that big tube in his mouth, and he kept trying to say something. And what he was saying is, "Where is Mom? Where's Doris?" That was his first wife, of course. And he was looking for her. And tried to say something else, and J.D. couldn't understand him, so he was going like this. So his son gave him a pad of paper and a pen, and he wrote a note to his son. And a few words they could make out were that he was asking for Doris, and he was asking for his father-in-law, who had been dead for about 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
That was Homer. And then he signed it very legibly, "Love, Dad." And, that's not a vegetable. They said he'd be a vegetable if he came to. So anyway, he was busy looking around. He was looking for his wife. He was looking for his father-in-law and the whole bit. So anyway, a few nights later, they were able to take the tubes out, and they put him into a... Was he still in intensive care when you
Yeah.
talked to him?
Yeah.
Okay, we were all around this bed, and Joanne said, J.D., you got a faraway look in your eyes. What are you thinking about? He said, "I'm thinking about heaven." He says, "It's so beautiful." He said, "There's no pain, there's no suffering." And then he turned to me, looked me straight in the eyes, took my hand, and he said, "And God gave me 2 good wives, and there is no jealousy between them."
Oh, how precious.
And so anyway, then by Wednesday he was moved into a private room, and I said, "Let anybody come in to see him," just because he had told his son, "Don't be mad at God. We just have to save a few more lives or touch a few more lives," because his son was really upset that God had let this happen. So anyway, people came in, doctors came in, nurses came in. I mean, they were all in that room asking, telling them, "You're a miracle, J.D." He says, "Yeah, I know." So anyway, he died on a Thursday night, was raised on Saturday morning, and his son sat by his bed each night. And that following Saturday, he woke up, got out of bed, went to the restroom, and he went and washed his hands and was walking with a walker and came back to the bed, and his son was watching him. And his son said, "Man," he says, "don't you think you're smart, running all over the place like nothing happened?" And they said he'd had a massive heart attack that destroyed 3 chambers of his heart. And I had said, "That's okay. God put that heart there. He can put a new one." So anyhow, what had happened during this time was that a young man, physical therapist, had tried to walk with JD. You know, he put that big belt around him and was holding on to it and holding on to the heart monitor stand. And he could not keep up with JD. JD was 76 years old, and here this young kid couldn't keep up with him. He got him back to bed, and he said, "There's nothing wrong with that man's heart. He's like a 20-year-old. Well,
Had new heart.
new heart. So anyhow, then they send in this girl to do the vocational testing, you know, do the 20 questions to see if there's any brain damage. He answered everything, back and forward, the whole thing. He had everything down. One question, and he kind of missed that, and he says, "Oh no, I was wrong. It's this. No brain damage, no nothing, totally healed." And so anyhow, then his son, you know, said, running around like nothing happened. And JD, the nurse came in to help him into bed. And then he said to his son, he lay there on the bed, put his hands over his chest, and he says, "Oh, it's such a beautiful day. What are we going to do today?" His son says, "The doctor's out there right now, the neurologist, that said that he'd be nothing but a vegetable." He says, "He's out there writing your discharge papers. You're going to go to heart rehab for a few days to learn how to slow down." And all of a sudden, JD Jr. said it was like somebody put a blanket over his face. And he said, it was so strange. He says, and then all of a sudden I heard the nurse yell, "Flatline, flatline." So JD, fully, totally, completely healed with a discharge papers written, and he laid back and very quietly died.
He got discharged then, and
Yeah, that's
Yep,
right.
discharged to heaven. Yeah.
Yeah, and the doctor was out there just totally, "I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened." I said, "That's okay. I know what happened." So Joanne and I went in the room alone with JD's body. She looked at me. She says, "You want him back?" I said, "No. He has seen something that none of us have seen."
Yeah, that's right.
So at the funeral, I felt that there was a great healing because the pastor that he had had a conflict with, that had been not very nice to him, came and wanted to do the funeral. And I said, "No, we've already got a pastor that's going to do it. However, you can talk to him. Maybe he'll let you say something." Because JD had said to me, "I would never want that man to preach my funeral service if I died, when I died." But I felt that we needed to have a healing, and that pastor knew he had done JD wrong. So the pastor that had been there for praying for JD's healing, he gave this pastor permission to talk, and he did that. And there were at least 5 people in the audience that raised their hand for salvation or for rededication. And JD was a soul winner. So
as are you.
So anyhow, the thing was, when I had that feeling, within, that I'll see the dead raised. God is a healer.
Yep.
JD was totally healed.
And the nurse that didn't want us to get our hopes up, he was the one going around telling everybody that man's a miracle. So God was glorified.
And the little Baptist nurse.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
She-
wanted the glory in the end. and
Yeah.
God did.
Yeah.
That's what-
And JD was done. He'd seen it.
You mean the Baptist nurse that
Yeah,
moved out with all the other stuff that moved out?
Well, the little Baptist nurse had been kind of tinkering around, waiting to hear what was going on. And it was like she was having some emotional problems, some serious things going on in her life, and she just needed to be there to hear all of this.
And so she was there when he came out of the coma.
Yeah. So that was that.
So I think we covered all the things I had in mind.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
Well, there
What's-
was one other thing that when my brother was killed that time, he wanted to live. He was a week away from being married and was full of life. He didn't want to die, but he was killed instantly. And that was in 1950, February 3, 1950, on a gorgeous moonlit night. Anyhow, in 1957, my husband and I were transferring, we were going from one base to another. He was going to go overseas. And I remember sitting in the car where I was so unhappy. I just wished I could get out of it all, kind of like a death wish. And we were struck head on, Gallup, New Mexico, and by a drunk driver. And I was thrown into the windshield. My face was all cut up. I was knocked unconscious, and the doors were jammed, so my husband had to pull me out through the window. And I was a mess. I was cut all the way across here, almost scalped. There was one little piece that held my scalp on, and cut here and here. My nose was broken and cut under my chin. And they put me in, a little Indian doctor sewed me up, Dr. Gutierrez. And then they transferred me to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they put me in a dark room for 9 days because they said I would probably be blind for life because I had all those glass slivers in my eyes. So my eyes are fine.
Yes.
God is good.
Yes.
So I think that's about it,
Okay.
right?
Did someone, I heard someone have a question?
I was just
Yes.
reminding Dottie of what we were talking about.
Oh, okay,
Oh, that's great, I forgot about that one.
okay,
Should just share that.
all right. I think that's it. So, happy birthday.
Thank you all.
Happy birthday, dear Dottie. Happy birthday to you and many more.
Thank you all.
We love you.